Chapter 9. A blood-red sky. Thin, black lines of trees, devoid of any colour, pointing like dark needles out of the grey scorched earth. A maze of cracks like old paint in the dirt. That's what I expected to see. Instead, what greeted me upon stepping out the TARDIS was almost serene. We had arrived on the western hills looking down into the valley, where the remains of the town were. Destroyed buildings were all that was left. But around us, and even now overgrowing the ruins, was green. It must have been near dawn. The sky was a bright blue, fringes of pink slowly fading as a few clouds crept in. The sounds of insects and other wildlife chirped calmly, and in the distance, even the sound of gently flowing water could be heard. My knees buckled, and I sat down heavily on the grass. The grass. I ran my fingers deeply into it, gripping it tightly and pulling out a handful out of the ground. And closing my eyes, I held it up to my face and took in a deep breath. For a moment, I was home. The smell of the grass, the sounds of nature, everything that had happened to me had just felt like a bad dream. I then felt a hand on my shoulder.
I know what you were probably expecting. If you need to take a moment or you just want to stay here, then I won't be long.
I opened my eyes and looked up into the bright sky. Thank you. But I just needed a moment. Time to move. Besides, it's starting to rain here anyway. The doctor looked up into the sky and held his hand out, waiting for a drop to land on it. Puzzled, he turned to me, mouth open to say something, but stopped. He held out his hand to help me up, and wiping the tears from my cheeks, I did so. And we began walking down to the valley towards the ruins of the town. Even in ruin, I could still recognise the layout of the town. I felt myself drawn, almost magnetically, to walk around the walls to the front gate. But now there was no gate, either destroyed during the original invasion or long since lost in the battle with nature. And what remained of the walls were no higher than me in places. We carefully clambered down over a low broken section of wall. Well, I say we. More like I clambered down and the doctor simply vaulted over it. For such an old man, he was still very spurry. The stone cobbles wobbled slightly underfoot as we walked, their layout familiar, but overgrown and uneven as grass spouted from between them. As we walked, I looked around, expecting to see familiar buildings and faces. We passed the field inn, now just a small, roofless husk of low scorched beams, broken frames, and just past what remained of the door, a staircase. It once led up to the second floor, now reduced to a climb to nowhere. We came to one of the 4 bridges and mills, just before the town square. Once beautiful in its simplicity, it had become rather a personal achievement to the town. When the natural spring had been discovered during the building of the stables, it was decided it would be allowed to flow through the town to supply fresh water. It had previously required a pump system and was often prone to faults. It came from the nearby lake over to the next hill. So once the river had been dug, several bridges were built around the town, and with them all, a mill to provide power. But now, like so many other things, it lay in ruin. The bridge collapsed in the middle, the water wheel of the south mill lay strewn across the river in several parts. But the spring still flowed, making its way through the debris as if nothing had changed. We used the debris as stepping stones to cross the river, although, being exposed to the elements for so long, the wood of the wheel began crumbling away under our feet, and the doctor selected a few choice of words that I previously only ever heard from the mouths of hardened space mariners, and that was when he stumbled and ended up with a soaked boot. Carefully and eventually we made it to the other side, and followed the path to the town square. In more peaceful times this was something else to behold. The narrowed cobbled streets and close houses suddenly given way to a vast open space, often peppered with street stalls and the huge bell tower at its centre. Now even before reaching it, the square seems no more or less than any other area of the town, with nothing to distinguish it from any other ruined part of the town. The tallest thing in the square were a couple of trees, which jutted from the cobbles, their roots forcing stones out, erupting like a green volcano. As we approached the centre, the doctor began to sweep the strange silver device back and forth, as if looking for something. But when I saw the remains of the bell tower, my mind clouded as I remembered that day. And yet at the same time it seems like this could not have been the same place. At the time my only thought had been to get away. I never thought to look back and see the fallen tower. Seeing it now, it just didn't seem real. All that remained was a pile of rubble hiding behind the crumbling ruins of the tower base. Only distinguishable by the gap where its door used to be, and through it, the remains of a few stone steps leading upward. The doctor had wandered off to the other side of the square. Still sweeping his arms in wide arcs, he occasionally stopped to look at the device, or held it up to his ear before muttering to himself with a look of mild annoyance, and then began to wave it around again. I decided to leave him be, and I walked around the bell tower remains, and that's when I saw it. My knees suddenly gave way, my mouth became dry, and I felt my heart quicken as I gazed upon it. The bell from the tower. My mind suddenly raced with the memories of clambering inside it to shield myself. The sense of relief at the idea of survival at the time now became a hollow, dark guilt in my chest. The thoughts of all those who had died and how it would be next. The feeling of falling, the sudden pain as I hit the ground, the blackness, the hope that was it for me. That being crushed to death in the falling rubble was a better fate than death by Dalek. As I wept, my mind continued, but then slowed, and my breath became steadier as I remembered him. The man that stood not far away from me, almost a whole other person in his youthfulness. But those eyes, the same guilt. A guilt that outweighed mine by unthinkable amounts. A guilt of being a survivor. Yet he saved me. He made me survive. Why? And why had he been here in the first place? Why come back now? A hand fell on my shoulder, and I looked up through my tears, and here I was once again. And here he was, a blurry vision of that man, when I needed him most. Here to help me.
I know it might seem a silly question in the circumstances,
he said, softly.
But are you all right?
To any normal person, the compulsory reaction to this question would have been one of anger. Yes, it was a silly question. Of course I wasn't all right. But once more there was a kindness to his voice. He didn't ask because he didn't know what to say. He asked because he knew I wasn't. I stood up, wiping the tears from my eyes, my voice cracking slightly as I spoke. Yes, I'm fine. Thank you. We both knew it was a lie, but that still said all it needed to. The doctor jovially but tenderly patted me on the shoulder.
Yes, of course you are,
he said, before he raised his small device once again. It buzzed a couple of times, then he held it to his ear, and then in front of his right eye, turning himself about as if surveying for something. I don't really know why I felt the need to say what I said next. He made it clear I didn't need to explain. It's just that... I paused, swallowing, collecting myself. This is where we met. All those years ago. I was hiding in the bell when the Daleks destroyed the tower. The doctor spun around and gave me a look of intense surprise. What is it? I asked, becoming a little unnerved by his gaze. He glanced over at the fallen bell, and his expression becoming one of sorrow.
About that. It wasn't the Daleks. It was me.